It was a warm summer afternoon in a small town, where everyone knew everyone, and things moved at a slower pace. The kind of place where people would greet each other by name and wave as they passed by. Life was simple, and the community was close-knit, or at least, that's what most people thought. But that afternoon, things were about to change in a way no one could have anticipated. Officer Carter was feeling the weight of the world that day. His shift had started off rough, and as the hours dragged on, he felt the tension building inside of him. It wasn't just the heat of the day, or the endless traffic stops that were taking up most of his time. He had personal issues weighing heavily on his mind. His marriage was on the rocks, his bank account was almost empty, and he felt stuck in a small town where things never seemed to go his way. Every little inconvenience felt like a mountain, and he had little patience left for anyone who wasn't adding to his happiness. Around noon, while on patrol, Officer Carter pulled into the parking lot of a local convenience store. The store wasn't much, just a tiny place with a few shelves of snacks and drinks. It wasn't the kind of place that drew a lot of attention, but there he was, trying to gather himself for the next few hours of his shift. As he got out of the car and began walking towards the store, he noticed a man standing near the entrance. Marcus, a black man in his early 30s, was casually leaning against the wall, staring into the distance. He didn't seem to be doing anything wrong, but for some reason, Officer Carter's eyes narrowed. Maybe it was the way Marcus stood there, so calm and collected, or perhaps it was just the anger that had built up inside him. Regardless, he saw Marcus and decided that this was the moment to act. Without a second thought, Officer Carter walked over to Marcus, his boots making a heavy sound on the pavement. He tried to mask the frustration in his voice as he asked, "What are you doing here?" Marcus, surprised but polite, looked up at the officer and smiled slightly. "Just getting a drink," he replied, motioning toward the door. "Nothing wrong, just stopping by." The weeks following the investigation were filled with anticipation. For the town, the situation felt like a turning point, though not everyone realized just how much things were about to shift. The days leading up to the official announcement of Marcus as the new police chief were filled with whispers and speculation. People were curious about how Marcus would handle things, and they were even more curious about how Officer Carter would react when he learned the truth. The weeks turned into months, and the transformation in the department was beginning to take shape. For Marcus, the new police chief, it was clear that change wouldn't happen overnight. But he was making steady progress. The officers were starting to see his commitment, and many of the residents of the town were beginning to feel the shift as well. Things weren't perfect yet, but they were moving in the right direction. One of the most important things Marcus had focused on was building trust within the department. He had sat down with each officer individually, including Officer Carter, to discuss their roles and expectations. There had been many tough conversations, but they were necessary. The department needed to be united, and Marcus wasn't afraid to address the issues head-on. As the months went by, Officer Carter worked hard to prove himself. At first, it was clear that he was struggling. The weight of his past actions hung over him, and it wasn't easy to rebuild the trust he had lost. But Marcus had given him a chance, and Carter was determined to make the most of it. He was quieter now, more reflective, and he began to work harder than ever before. One of the first major tests for the department came in the form of a robbery that had taken place at a local jewelry store. It was a typical case, but the robbery had shaken the town. People were nervous, and the pressure was on for the police to solve the crime. For Marcus, it was another test of his leadership. He assembled his team, including Carter, and they went over the details of the case. Marcus emphasized that they needed to work together as a team, that each officer's skills and expertise would be crucial in solving the case. Carter, for his part, was focused. He had been keeping his head down and working quietly, and now it was time to put all of his energy into this case. As the investigation unfolded, there were many leads that didn't go anywhere. But Marcus stayed calm. He knew that being a good leader wasn't just about making the right decisions, it was about supporting his team and letting them know that he had their backs. With Marcus's guidance, the team was beginning to pull things together. They narrowed down their suspects and eventually made an arrest. The robbery was solved, and the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. Marcus was proud of the department's hard work, but he knew that the real victory wasn't just in solving the case. It was in the way the officers had come together, working as a cohesive team, something that hadn't always been the case before. And while Marcus couldn't take all the credit, he knew that the environment of trust and respect he had created was a big part of it. As time went on, the relationship between Marcus and Officer Carter continued to evolve. Carter was still working hard to regain the respect of his peers, but he was making progress. He had learned to approach situations with a level head, to be more patient, and to think before acting. His interactions with the public had improved, and his colleagues were beginning to respect him again. One afternoon, as Marcus walked into the station, he noticed Carter sitting at his desk, staring at a report. It was a quiet moment, the kind where the station felt calm and almost peaceful. But Marcus could tell that Carter had something on his mind. He walked over to his desk and leaned in slightly. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but serious. Carter looked up, a small sigh escaping his lips. "I've been thinking," he began slowly. "I know I messed up. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully make up for what happened with you, but I just wanted to thank you for giving me a chance." Marcus nodded. "You've earned it, Carter. It's been a process, and there's still work to be done. But you've shown me that you're committed to being better. That's all I can ask for." Carter's eyes softened, a genuine sense of gratitude in his expression. "I'm trying. I know it's not easy. But I want to do the right thing now. I want to make up for my mistakes." Marcus smiled slightly. "Just keep doing what you're doing. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you learn from them. You've got a long way to go, but you're on the right track." For the first time, Carter didn't just see Marcus as his boss. He saw him as someone who had given him the opportunity to change, someone who believed in redemption. It was a feeling that Carter hadn't had before, and it gave him the motivation he needed to keep moving forward. The department continued to grow stronger, and the town began to heal from the tensions that had built up over the years. People started to trust the police again, and they saw that the changes weren't just cosmetic, they were real. The officers worked harder, and the community began to feel safer. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. One day, after another long shift, Marcus stood outside the station, looking out over the town. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the streets. He had come a long way since the day he had stepped into the role of police chief. There had been struggles, setbacks, and difficult conversations. But there had also been victories, both big and small. The department was stronger than ever, and the community was starting to come together in ways it hadn't in years. Marcus felt a sense of pride, but he also knew there was more work to be done. The challenges wouldn't stop, and there would be more difficult decisions ahead. But for now, he was content. He had made a difference. And he had helped others do the same. As the town continued to heal, so did Officer Carter. He had found redemption not through grand gestures or words, but through his actions. He had earned back the respect of his colleagues, and more importantly, he had earned his own sense of dignity back. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was a journey that had changed him, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The town had learned something important during this time, that everyone, no matter their past, had the potential for change. And that with the right support, guidance, and willingness to grow, anyone could be given the chance to make things right. The day Marcus officially stepped into his role as police chief was one that would be etched into the town's memory. There was no grand ceremony, no parade or fireworks, just the quiet, steady work of a man taking on a huge responsibility. He had the respect of many, but there were still those who didn't fully believe in the change he was trying to bring. Marcus knew this would take time, but he was ready for the challenge. That morning, as he sat at his new desk, the weight of the job settled on his shoulders. He had always been someone who embraced responsibility, but being the chief of a police department was different. It wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about setting a standard for others to follow. And that meant handling difficult situations, like the one with Officer Carter, with professionalism and wisdom. The first thing Marcus did was go through the department's files. He spent hours reading over reports, looking at past cases, and familiarizing himself with the officers under his command. He knew that, for the most part, they were good people, but a few bad apples could spoil the entire bunch. And if there was one thing Marcus believed in, it was accountability. If the officers under his command weren't doing their jobs with integrity, then it was his duty to fix it. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Marcus had already set up meetings with some of the officers to discuss the department's goals and what needed to be done to improve. One of those meetings would be with Officer Carter. Marcus knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. He had been thinking about it since the day he took the job, but now it was time to face it head-on. Officer Carter walked into the office, his usual confident stride somewhat subdued. He didn't know exactly what to expect, but he knew this conversation was coming. As he stood in front of Marcus's desk, he tried to hide the nervousness creeping up on him. He had always prided himself on being a tough officer, someone who wasn't easily rattled. But now, in the presence of the man he had once disrespected, things felt different. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat, Carter," he said calmly. Carter sat down, his back straight, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. But inside, he was struggling to find the right words. He had never imagined he would be sitting in front of Marcus like this, not after everything that had happened. It was hard to swallow the reality of the situation. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable," Marcus began, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm here because I need to address something. Something that can't just be ignored." Carter shifted in his seat, his hands clasped together in his lap. "I understand, Chief. I know things didn't go well between us. I shouldn't have acted the way I did." Marcus nodded slowly. He had known that Carter would eventually come around, but this was still a step in the right direction. "I appreciate you saying that. But I need you to understand something. We can't just let things slide, not in this department. We're supposed to serve and protect everyone in this town. And that means treating everyone with respect, no matter who they are." Carter's eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, unable to look Marcus in the eye. He knew Marcus was right. He had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo it. The moment he had spit on Marcus had been one of the lowest points of his career. And now, sitting in front of the man he had disrespected, he realized just how much that moment had cost him. "I know," Carter muttered. "I was out of line. I let my anger take over. I've regretted it ever since." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the desk. "I'm not here to punish you, Carter. What happened was a mistake, and we all make mistakes. But this department needs to be built on trust. And trust is something that takes time to rebuild, especially after something like that." Carter nodded slowly. "I get it. I do. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. If you give me a chance, I'll prove that I can be a better officer, a better person." Marcus studied him for a moment. He could see the sincerity in Carter's eyes, but he also knew that words were easy. It was actions that mattered. "I'm not going to give you a pass just because you said the right things, Carter. You've got work to do. But I'm willing to give you that chance. I'll be watching closely, but I believe in second chances. You have to show me that you can do better." Carter looked up, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Chief. I won't let you down." Marcus gave a small nod. Good. Now, let's move forward. We have a department to run. The meeting ended on a somewhat positive note, though both men knew that the road ahead would be challenging. For Marcus, it was the beginning of a long journey to prove himself as a leader. For Carter, it was the start of a difficult but necessary process of redemption. But there was a certain quiet understanding between them now. They both knew that the trust between them couldn't be restored in a single meeting. It would take time, maybe even years. As Carter left the office, Marcus sat back in his chair, letting out a deep breath. It had been a tough conversation, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that he had handled it with integrity. Now, he could turn his attention to the bigger picture. The department needed changes, and those changes wouldn't happen overnight. But Marcus was committed to making those changes, one step at a time. The days that followed were filled with difficult decisions. Marcus had to navigate the delicate balance of leading a police department while also maintaining his own sense of fairness and justice. He knew that not everyone would agree with his methods, but he wasn't going to let that deter him. He was in this for the long haul. As for Officer Carter, the days ahead weren't easy. He knew that his actions had consequences, and he was determined to prove himself worthy of the second chance Marcus had given him. He worked harder than ever, doing everything he could to regain the respect of his colleagues and the town. But no matter how hard he worked, Carter couldn't forget that moment, the moment he had crossed a line, and the moment that had led him to sit in front of Marcus as his superior. It was a harsh lesson, but one that would stay with him forever. Marcus, for his part, stayed focused on the task ahead. He had always been someone who focused on his work, not on the drama around him. He understood that being in law enforcement wasn't just about wearing a uniform or carrying a badge. It was about responsibility, integrity, and doing what was right for the community. His upbringing had instilled these values in him, and now they were about to guide him in a new direction. The day of the announcement came quickly. The town hall meeting was packed. Chairs were filled with residents who were eager to see what would happen next. Marcus stood at the front, next to the mayor and the town council members, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. He had worked hard for this moment, and now it was time to step into a role that would not only change his life but could also change the entire town. When the mayor made the announcement, the room fell silent for a moment, and then the applause began. People were generally supportive, excited even, to see someone they knew personally taking on such an important role. Marcus gave a humble nod, acknowledging the cheers but staying composed. He wasn't there to celebrate, he was there to begin the hard work of earning the community's trust. It wasn't long before the moment that everyone had been waiting for arrived. Officer Carter, who had been attending the meeting as part of his regular duty, stood among the crowd, still unaware of the identity of the new chief. He had heard the rumors, of course. He had heard people talking about how someone new would be taking over the position soon, but he hadn't connected the dots. In his mind, it couldn't possibly be Marcus. There was no way someone like him would be in charge. Carter had always considered himself a steady presence in the department, someone who knew the ins and outs of law enforcement. He had never imagined that his actions that day, the day he had spit on Marcus, would lead to such a dramatic turn of events. As the applause continued, Carter stood there, his arms folded, his face unreadable. He didn't know what was coming. When the mayor turned to introduce Marcus, the room went silent again. There was a brief pause, and then Marcus stepped forward to the microphone. His voice was steady, but his heart raced a little as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you, everyone, for your support," Marcus said, his voice clear and strong. "I am honored to take on this role, and I want you all to know that I am committed to making this department one that serves and protects with integrity. My promise to you is that I will work tirelessly to ensure that justice and fairness are at the heart of everything we do." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, making sure to make eye contact with as many people as possible. Then, without missing a beat, he continued, "As I stand here today, I am reminded of the responsibility I have not just as the new police chief, but as a member of this community. I am here to listen, to learn, and to lead. Together, we will make this town a better place for everyone." The room erupted in applause again, but this time, it was different. People weren't just clapping because of the announcement, they were clapping because they believed in Marcus. They trusted him. He had earned that trust, even before he had taken office. And as the applause died down, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. This was the beginning of something new. Meanwhile, Officer Carter stood in the back of the room, still processing the news. His face went pale as it slowly dawned on him, the man he had disrespected, the man he had humiliated in front of others, was now the very person who would be in charge of him. Marcus wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't just some random man from the community. He was now the new police chief. Carter felt a rush of emotions. At first, there was shock, then disbelief. How could this have happened? He thought back to the incident, the moment when he had let his anger get the best of him, when he had spat on Marcus in front of everyone. In that moment, he had never imagined that he would be standing in this very room, hearing Marcus speak as the new leader of the police department. His mind raced, and for a few moments, he struggled to come to terms with what was happening. It felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. He wasn't sure what to do. Should he apologize? Should he confront Marcus right then and there? But he knew, deep down, that no matter what he did now, it wouldn't undo the damage he had caused. Marcus, however, didn't seem to notice the shift in the room. He didn't look over at Carter. He didn't acknowledge him. He was too focused on the work ahead. For him, it wasn't about proving anything to Carter, it was about proving something to himself and to the community. He was here to make a difference, and nothing, not even the past, was going to stop him from moving forward. As the meeting concluded, everyone filed out of the room, chatting excitedly about the changes that were coming. The community was ready for a fresh start, and Marcus was at the center of it. He had already begun to think about the steps he would take to strengthen the department, to build trust with the community, and to make sure that the police force was held to the highest standards. But as he left the building, he couldn't help but feel a bit of unease. He knew that the hardest part of his new role wouldn't be making decisions or handling the logistics of running a police department. The hardest part would be dealing with people like Officer Carter, people who had no idea how much their actions could affect others, and who had yet to understand the true meaning of respect and accountability. For Marcus, this wasn't just about being the new police chief. It was about setting an example, about showing that leadership wasn't about power, it was about service. And as the weeks went on, Marcus was determined to prove that he could lead with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone in the community, no matter their background or past mistakes. But Officer Carter wasn't satisfied. He crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes, looking at Marcus as though he was some sort of threat. "You're loitering," he said, his tone becoming sharper. "I don't think you're here to buy anything. Just move along." The following days after the incident felt like an unsettling silence had fallen over the small town. People went about their routines, but there was an underlying tension that could be felt by anyone paying attention. The air felt thick with unspoken words, and everyone seemed to be waiting for something to break, but no one was sure what it would be. For Marcus, life continued as usual. He went to work at the local auto shop, greeted the regulars who came in for repairs, and carried on with his life. But in the back of his mind, he knew that what had happened with Officer Carter couldn't be ignored. He had been humiliated, disrespected, and, more importantly, the incident was a clear reflection of something much larger than a single bad encounter. It was a moment that needed to be addressed not just for himself, but for the town. Marcus knew that he couldn't let the incident slide without taking action. He wasn't the type to be passive when it came to things like this. His father had taught him early on that you don't let people walk all over you, but you also handle things the right way. It wasn't about getting revenge, it was about holding people accountable. So, after a long day at work, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table and began drafting a formal complaint. He described the events of that afternoon, the officer's aggression, and the unprovoked act of disrespect. It wasn't easy, but he kept his tone calm and professional, ensuring that the facts were presented clearly. His hope wasn't to stir up trouble but to make sure that Officer Carter faced consequences for his actions. After all, officers were supposed to protect and serve, not abuse their authority. The next morning, Marcus submitted the complaint to the police department. It wasn't the only one. The town was small, but word spread quickly, and others who had witnessed the event began coming forward with their own accounts of what had happened. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of the backlash they might face, but as the community rallied around Marcus, more people spoke up. They knew that if they didn't stand together, the system would never change. The following week, the local news picked up the story. What started as a small incident in a convenience store had turned into a much bigger issue, and it wasn't just Marcus who was affected. The town's residents began to question how many other acts of injustice had gone unnoticed. It wasn't just about race, it was about power, about someone in authority taking advantage of their position to mistreat others. And for the first time in a long time, people began to wonder if things had gone too far. The police department was forced to investigate the incident. Officer Carter, however, remained unshaken. He didn't understand why people were making such a big deal out of it. To him, it was just a small moment in time, something he could brush off easily. After all, he was a cop. What could go wrong? But as the investigation started, things quickly began to unravel for Officer Carter. He had no idea just how much attention the incident had garnered. The town council began receiving calls from all over, angry citizens, concerned citizens, even people from neighboring towns who had heard about the story. The pressure was mounting, and the town couldn't ignore it anymore. Marcus, meanwhile, didn't say much to anyone. He didn't need to. He knew that he had done what was right, and the rest would take care of itself. But as the days passed, he started to hear whispers. Some of them were about him, some about Officer Carter, but all of them were laced with curiosity. People were starting to talk. One day, as Marcus was leaving work, he overheard a conversation between two women at the coffee shop. They were discussing the investigation into Officer Carter, and what one of them said caught his attention. "Did you hear?" the woman said. "That man Marcus, the one who filed the complaint? He's going to be the new police chief." The other woman looked at her in surprise. "What? Are you sure?" The first woman nodded. "Yeah, it was just announced last week. I don't know the details, but I heard it's happening soon." Marcus froze. He had heard rumors about the police chief position being up for grabs, but he had never imagined it would be him. It felt surreal to hear them talking about him as if he was some kind of figure of authority. He had only ever wanted to live a quiet life, but now everything was changing. For a moment, he stood there, processing the information. The officer who had spit on him, the man who had disrespected him in front of everyone, he was now going to find out the truth. The truth that Marcus wasn't just some random person to be dismissed. He was someone who was now in a position of power, someone who could make changes in the town that could affect every single person living there. Marcus left the coffee shop that day with a mix of emotions. There was a sense of justice, of knowing that his actions had already made an impact. But there was also an uneasy feeling. What would it mean for him to take the role of police chief in such a small town? And what would it mean for Officer Carter, the man who had so carelessly humiliated him? The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Marcus was formally introduced as the new police chief, and the news spread like wildfire. The town council, recognizing Marcus's qualifications and experience in law enforcement, had made the decision to appoint him, despite the controversies that had surrounded the department in recent months. His promotion wasn't just a personal victory, it was symbolic of change. It was a sign that things were about to shift, that the community was taking a stand for accountability and respect. But while Marcus was processing his new role, Officer Carter's attitude was beginning to shift as well. He had been hearing the whispers, the rumors, and the discussions about the new chief. But he had no idea that the man he had disrespected was the same man who was now going to be in charge of him. The tension in the air was thick. The town had already started to change. And Officer Carter had no idea just how much his actions would cost him. Marcus was taken aback for a moment, unsure of why the officer was being so aggressive. He had been in town for a while, working at a local business and doing his best to stay out of trouble. This wasn't the first time he had encountered law enforcement, but it was the first time he felt something wasn't quite right. "I'm not loitering, officer," Marcus replied calmly, hoping to defuse the situation. "I'm just waiting to grab a drink. I don't want any trouble." But Officer Carter wasn't hearing it. His mind was clouded with irritation, and his frustration was beginning to take over. The weight of his own personal struggles pushed him to make an example out of Marcus. He felt a sense of power, standing there with his badge and uniform, and for a moment, it felt like everything was within his control. "You're wasting my time," Officer Carter snapped, stepping closer to Marcus. "I said move along, now." The words hit Marcus like a punch in the gut, but he didn't flinch. He had lived through much worse, and he knew better than to let anger cloud his judgment. "I'm not causing any trouble," he repeated. "I'm just standing here." But the officer wasn't done yet. Something inside him snapped, and in that moment, he allowed his anger to speak for him. Without warning, he took a step forward and, with a look of disdain, spat right in Marcus's face. Marcus's eyes widened in shock, and for a brief moment, everything around him seemed to freeze. He wiped his face, trying to process what had just happened. The spitting was a shocking act, something he never expected from a law enforcement officer. His first instinct was to react, to fight back, but something told him to stay calm. The officer might have been looking for a fight, but Marcus wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead of retaliating, Marcus stood still, trying to keep his emotions in check. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call the officer names, and didn't try to escalate the situation. He simply wiped the spit off his face, turned, and started walking away. Officer Carter watched him leave, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief washing over him. He had gotten what he wanted, hadn't he? But as Marcus walked away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. For a split second, he wondered if he had gone too far, but the thought quickly left him. He was still in control, wasn't he? Marcus didn't look back as he walked to his car. He didn't stop to confront the officer or to argue. He knew that the situation wasn't over, that this wasn't going to be the last time he would have to face this kind of injustice. But he didn't want to make a scene. He had learned over the years that sometimes, the best way to deal with people like Officer Carter was to walk away. He would make sure to file a complaint, but for now, he just needed to breathe and process what had happened. As he drove home, his mind raced. How many other people had faced the same kind of treatment? How many times had they been forced to endure similar abuse? He had faced his share of challenges in life, but this felt different. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a reflection of a much larger issue, and it wasn't something he could ignore. But for now, Marcus focused on what he could control, his response. He wouldn't let Officer Carter's actions define him. He would handle this the right way, calmly, and with dignity. The officer might have spit on him, but Marcus knew he had the power to change the narrative.